Good morning. Ah, the woman scared me. The voice is okay. Continue. Hit continue. That scared me, Andrea. I wasn't ready. I was like, ah. All right. Oh, am I? Can you guys see my screen? Did it go away? Let me see.
Yeah, we can see
That's
your screen great.
That's it.
kind of weird. I lost the. Okay. Anyway, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, my friends, to the show. We're going to be discussing an introduction to the query store. That's what Andrea said. I just briefly introduce myself. I hate talking about myself for very long. There's me. I work at Microsoft. I do, excuse me. I've been a Microsoft certified trainer for about 20 years. One of these days, I'll actually get good at it. If you want to contact me, there's my Twitter, my website, and all my slides and demos from all my presentations. My personal presentations are on my GitHub, so you can download any code, slides, not just for this presentation, but actually I cleaned it up. So any presentation from the last year. I don't have any Microsoft official material out there because I'm not allowed. Also, this presentation is my own personal presentation, so any recommendations are not officially from Microsoft. So I always have to mention that because someone will say, well, John said on Thursday, October 21st at 5:30 that you have to do this setting. My own personal recommendation. So I always have to legal disclaimer, so I don't get in trouble. So this session, we have four main topics. Well, it's Query Store, but we're going to walk through what is Query Store. It's awesome. It's the most awesomest feature in 2016, and 2017 and 2019. But it's the best thing SQL Server since that was released in 2016. We'll walk through the different settings, how to configure Query Store, what each setting does, recommendations, again, my own personal recommendations on what settings you would have. Every database is different. So if I say 15 minutes, you say, my database, we do it every 60 minutes. You're wrong, John. You're right. I'm wrong. Your database, every database is different. So I'm just the suggested settings that you would want to set and then work your way from there. So if you have a small database with like 4 tables, then, the setting for that, as opposed to someone has a 15 terabyte database, they're going to use different settings. So again, just the recommendations and the defaults. Then we'll walk through the reports that you have that are built into SQL. Amazing reports that you can look at to gather information, and not just for queries. There's one report that we'll see that actually establishes your overall usage, CPU and memory and IO, that you can get a good baseline for your entire server, not just your database, not just individual queries. So that's an often overlooked feature. And then some views if you want to go old school and retrieve data using, there's 7 Query Store catalog views, unless of course they introduced one this last week and I'm not aware of it. But this main 7 views that you have. So we'll go ahead and get started. But before we do get started, I'm going to go to demonstration. What? I know, shocking. I want to show you first, just to get a visualization. One, what is my demo code? What are we doing with the demo code? And give you a quick tour first of when we talk about Query Store, what are the reports that we have? And then we'll go back to the slides and cover the specific settings. One, just so I've been running this code for, I think, since about 3 o'clock. I've been running some code, and I always like to explain my code just so you know what's going on. They're like, hey, great, John, there's 4 plans. What is it actually doing? So here's my code. And again, you can download my code. Actually, all my performance tuning, I put them all under JD process demo. So all my how to create database table, DBC statements, deadlock demos, I put everything in one file. But this one is actually the Query Store Adventure Works. If you'd like to know more about plan caching and plan freezing, I've got those as well. You can go look at that, but you don't need those anymore because of Query Store. You can get those off my GitHub slides and all my performance tuning presentations. All right, so we're using our trusty friend AdventureWorks 2016. I really need to update my database to a newer version. Here, I'm basically, I turn off the query store and clear it out. I do that before each time I present this, just so we start from scratch. And then I drop 2 indexes that I build later on in the demo, just to reset to go with the basic settings for the sales order details table. I think it's sales order details. Then I turn it back on. Here's all your settings, how you can write them in T-SQL. I'm going to go through these settings, what they are, what they do, and some good suggested values. That's how you write in T-SQL. I'll show you in the Object Explorer also where you can change these settings. And we'll go through each one. Then I create this store procedure. This is the procedure I'm running in the background called get product info. I'm recompiling each time so I can get a new plan. Real world environment, probably don't want to recompile your store procedure each time unless it's one of those troubled store procedures. So it's just a basic store procedure where I'm selecting 3 columns: product ID, order quantity, and unit price from the sales order detail table. So I have that procedure, and then I scroll down. Then I have this code that loops through 25,000 times. Normally it takes about 4 hours to run it, to go through all of it. But I loop through and I run that store procedure using different values, just because it's going to generate different plans each time. I'm using the different values where you can see how many rows based off the values. And I switch up the order basically to fight any parameter sniffing that might come up with these plans. Because when I originally set this up, everybody wanted to use the procedure. It would optimize for 870 and then just keep reusing the clustered index scan as opposed to because of parameter sniffing. So here I'm fighting parameter sniffing just for the demonstration, just so I can get different plans and demonstrate the query store. This is not a good demonstration for fighting parameter sniffing, just to clarify that. That's a whole nother session. So I go through each time through, and then about every 5th time, I need to actually get some more real estate here real quick. Every 5th time through this code, again, I'm running it 25,000 times. Every 5th time I create a new non-clustered index, and there's already a default index on the product ID field, but I create a new one for product ID and include the unit price. And that's going to create a bookmark lookup. And we'll see that execution plan. And then every 5th time after that, I drop that index. In a real world environment, this is not a good index maintenance plan or strategy. Don't create and drop your indexes every 5 times. If you do, I know how to fix your performance issues. It's probably you're creating and dropping indexes all the time. Then every 5th time after that, I create another index, non-clustered index, that's including both unit price and order quantity. So this is an example of an index that covers a query. So we're just retrieving the information, or retrieving the 3 columns directly from that non-clustered index. And then about every 5th time I drop it. And then go through, again, I'm running it 25,000 times. So I just want to kind of explain what the code is doing. Like I said, I've been running it since I think about 3 o'clock. I think, yeah, that's all the code. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it now. So that's the code that's been running about 2.5 hours. But I want to explain what was happening, because a lot of times, and here's the report you can see, I've been getting for, if I hover over here, for the get product info, get product info, store procedure. The total duration has been 70,000 milliseconds, and it actually executed 12,719 times. So the last 2 hours, that's how many times it actually ran, and it created 4 different plans. My plan count is 4 for that code. And we'll actually walk through. There's one, plan ID 1 is the clustered index scan. Then we have plan ID 2 which is doing a bookmark or key lookup. Plan 39, well, I just jumped to 39. We have another bookmark lookup at a different index. I'll actually explain that a little bit later. And 53 is where it's getting all three. It's using that index that's getting order quantity, product ID, and unit price from the non-clustered index. So it's that same store procedure running over and over again, and I kept adding and dropping indexes just to get different plans for that same query, just so we could have this demonstration. But we'll come back to that in just a moment. We'll come back to that report because that's my favoriteest report ever because I like the bubbles. The one thing I dislike about Query Store, you can't change the colors. You can't change the colors of the bubbles, and also they change on you each time. So if I come back to this later, all the colors will change. Drives me crazy. I'm like, where's purple? And then purple's gone. All right. So you can see the, here we have Query Store, and here's the reports we'll walk through. I'll walk through what each one does. Like overall resource consumption. This actually won't be a good one to demonstrate here because I cleared out, I shouldn't have done, I cleared out my Query Store about 2.5 hours ago for this demonstration. So I don't have any data over the last month. I normally do, and I accidentally cleared it out, but we'll come back to those. If you do not see this Query Store folder, Query Store is not on. So to turn it on, right click on your database, go to properties, and boom goes the dynamite. Query Store, here's all your settings, and this is the next thing we're going to do. I'm going to walk through each one of these settings. But to turn on Query Store, you would select it right here. Off means it's off. Did I go too fast on that one? Anybody? No? Okay. So off is off. Read only, this could be useful if you gather data over the weekend or you have a troublesome query that runs at 3 o'clock at night. So you capture the data, and then during the day, maybe you just want to see the reports. So you can switch it to read only during the day so it doesn't impact other people accessing the database. There is some performance overhead of Query Store, but that's true of anything. I actually had one customer that, well, we can't use this because of the performance impact. And that's penny wise, pound foolish type of thinking, because how are you going to troubleshoot slow running queries? That's going to take, you're going to spend 8 hours troubleshooting something that could have only taken 30 seconds or 30 minutes using Query Store. So like, oh, that CPU usage went up 2% because of the Query Store, or we're using an extra 100 meg of, or 1 gig of drive space. The trade-off is you're going to save so much money in performance tuning and troubleshooting. You can, and I'll show you that as well. Kurt, excellent question, accurate question. I forgot the adjective for that type of good question. I'll show you that in just a moment. And I'm going to go through each one of these as well, each of the settings. And then read write is if you wanted to start capturing data. But this is where you would turn it on, read only or read write. As soon as you turn those on, as soon as you turn those on, then you will, John, what are you doing? Click OK. I don't know how to use Query Store. When you turn it on, then you go down to the reports. You'll see the reports here, and we'll walk through those. To answer Kurt's question, I actually closed my code, didn't I? Let me bring my code back. So here's the settings. Here's how we do it programmatically. And on the PowerPoint slides, which if you want to download my slides for documentation, hang them on your refrigerator, have your kids color on them, you're more than welcome. But actually, I have the slides are really good documentation, if I do say so myself. But kind of goes through each of these settings. So to actually turn Query Store on, that's how I can do that programmatically to answer Kurt's question. Right, alter database, AdventureWorks, set Query Store on, and then change operation mode to read write. And then I'll actually go through all the other settings as we go through the slides. So I just wanted to first walk through visually to see what the code's doing, kind of give you an indication of one of the reports, actually two of the reports we'll walk through. So we'll walk through all these settings and the configuration and reading these reports in just a moment. I think I heard someone, was there a question coming up, or did someone want to come off mute and ask a question? Or am I just hearing voices in my head again? It's just the voices in my head again. Okay. Sometimes that happens. They're like, oh, are those real voices or people on the internet? And I do that when I'm not even in meetings, just sitting in my apartment, like, where are those voices coming from? Sometimes there's ghosts. Never can tell. All right, so the first lesson, we haven't got to the first lesson yet. What are we doing? Here we go. Excuse me. So introduction to the query store. What is it? So you can see there's that page I just went to. Again, we'll walk through here in a minute. See what is a query store. If we look ahead a little bit, we'll look at the stores, but then we'll go through all the different settings. We'll walk through what each setting is, and either both graphically and T-SQL. So we can actually see the settings and what they do. You can see here's another example. We'll walk through those. So let me get back to where I once belonged. Get back, Jojo. Jojo was a man. Was I singing again? I was. Sorry. SQL karaoke. All right, so here we are. So what is the query store? After I've kind of demonstrated a little bit, did they try to clean your guns? Mine do. Oh, the ghosts. I had to figure out. I was like, the query store? No, the query store doesn't have any settings to clean guns. As far as I know, they might have introduced something this last week. Or maybe AdventureWorks, got out of the bike business, started selling guns. So query store, it is at the database level. So everything's it's part of your query store database. So everything is in that database. So if you move your database, there you go. If you move your database, this information is going to be part of the database. Now, I always get a question here, what about availability groups? When you set the settings on your primary availability group, this information is replicated over the other side. So you can still do reporting, but you can't, on your secondary, you can't capture information on the secondary. Maybe sometime in the future. They've been promising since 2016. I know our good friend Aaron Stellato out there. I will say almost everything I know about Query Store, I learned from Aaron Stellato. And she has a pre-con at SQL Pass Summit on Query Store. So this hour isn't enough. She's got an 8-hour class. Hopefully there's a lot of breaks. So it is at the database level. Where's that availability groups? Oh, so on your secondary server, you can't capture any information. And I know a lot of people have brought that up as maybe sometime in the future. It's mainly just for user databases. The data is stored in the database in internal tables. You can't get directly to those tables, but there are 7 built-in views, which I've documented on this slide deck that we'll walk through those at the tail end, maybe in about 32 minutes, maybe 28 minutes. We'll see where we're at. So you can use those views to capture information or user reports. And the data is going to be in there until you purge either hit that little button there that says purge query data or set, I forgot, alter database set query store equals clear. I forgot it's coming up, the actual setting. Okay. So why? We always have to, because it's awesome. That's why I use Query Store. I was mentioning this to Andrea. When I normally teach this during our performance tuning courses, our workshops that I deliver, about the hour before this lesson, I show the old way of trying to troubleshoot plans in the procedure cache, or if you wanted to force a plan, fix plan, use plan guides, you had to do a lot of that manually. And a lot of times you didn't even know there was a problem. So let's say my friend Sally wrote a query back in June, and it was optimized and it's been running perfectly. She's happy. And then Bob from accounting, for some reason, someone gave him access to the database. Bob from accounting writes a query and it forces a different plan, and now Sally's plan is now somehow gets updated. Maybe someone updated statistics, or Bob freed the proc cache, because that darn Bob in accounting. He cleared out the cache, and now Sally's query is running much slower. Or maybe over time, so much data was added into the tables that her query is no longer optimal. Prior to Query Store, I knew none of that, unless I was manually monitoring that procedure cache, capturing information from the procedure cache, looking at it on a daily basis. I didn't even know Sally wrote that query until she calls me on Monday morning. She says, "Don," I say, "What?" She says, "Hey, my query is running so much slower now. What's the problem?" Well, if I use a series of dynamic management views to look into the plan cache, or I've got code for that on my, if you want to download, on how to evaluate that. All I'm going to see was the last plan. I can't see any plans from the last month, the last 2 months. I can't see the plan that actually was working. What was the good plan? I have none of that. So the only plan I could see was like, well, here's the plan we have right now. Have you tried to recompile? Which is the performance tuning equivalent of, have you turned it on and back off? Or if you turn it off and back on, can you just run it with the recompile? There really wasn't much solutions unless you were actively monitoring every single DBA's query in the procedure cache and hope that no one restarted the computer or ran DBCC pre-proc cache. You only saw the last plan, and there's no history. I have no idea what the plans were 5 minutes ago, let alone 2 months ago. And also, there's not aggregated data prior to Query Store, where if I wanted to figure out what was the average runtime of a query or the average CPU usage, all I know is the last plan. I don't know anything after 5 minutes ago or 2 months ago or a year ago. You can actually capture information for an entire year if you wanted to. Why? I don't know. Can we look at the plan from January? Yeah, if you captured it, but that is just wasting space. So I get why, I guess. Maybe someone say, hey, it ran great in January. Oh, well, that's awesome. With Query Store, it stores the history. Not only can I see the last plan, I can see all the plans since last June. So I can go back and say, well, here's the timeline that Sally said her code was working well, and here's the plan. And then I can right click on it and say, force plan. It's a right click. Yes. Wait, can I compare plans to the data? Profiling on the run. I can compare plans. Can I compare it to the data? A little bit. Profiling, you'd probably want to use the live query stats of actually looking at the data as it's running, if you want to watch it. Yeah, what Jason saying there. Yeah, profiler is something different. So I'm not seeing, I know where you're going with now. But something like that, it would actually go to, extended events to capture data. But to compare plans to the data, it's two different. This is capturing execution plans. So yeah, yay, extended events. I have a better answer to that question, Kurt. Maybe we'll answer it along the way, because my answer would be use extended events to kind of do that. But you can compare plans, just kind of which one's more useful. But you could get a different, like, use extended events to kind of compare. So it might be using a couple tools for there. So you guys have already read the right-hand side. You have a history. You can aggregate data, CPU, memory usage of all the execution plans. And I can be proactive. For those who are new to the IT industry, proactive means you fix the issues before the trouble happens. That's a joke just for me. I know most of the time we're always trying to put out fires. We don't have time to actually be proactive. But here, I can call Sally on Friday and I'll say, hey, Sally. She says, what? I noticed that your query is running slower. It ran better in July or ran better in August, and I've noticed that the query has regressed. And she says, have you been watching me? Like, nope, I just opened up Query Store and looked at the regressed reports this morning, and yours was the number one, and I just wanted to call and be proactive. And she said, yours the best, John. I said, I know. So you can actually find those regressed queries. Thank you. Force plans. If anything else, that's the best thing. That's one of the cool things of Query Store. Because before, if you wanted to force a plan, there's a bunch of code, you had to write to go find that plan and then freeze the plan. And now it's a right click and a checkbox or a check mark on the bubble. Okay. We might along those lines, Kurt. We might see something. If not, I kind of know where you're going with that. We might see something along those lines. And it persists across restarts or Bob. When Bob does bad things. Do we have a Bob in class? I apologize if. All right, any Bobs that work in accounting in class? Yeah. So that's why I use the Query Store. Within the Query Store, there's actually three parts. 2016, there's actually two stores. 2017 introduced a weight stat store. Wait, what? We can actually capture weight stats now in 2017, sorry. Now it's not individual weight types. It's actually categories of weights, like how many locks did you have? But it's not going to get into specific locks. But it actually gives you good, maybe in the future, but it's going to persist those weight stats information. So that was introduced in 2017. But in 2016 and later, you had the plan store that stores the query text and query plan information. You can limit the number of unique plans. The default is 200. I'm not sure why you need to keep track of 200 plans for a query. Someone's recompiling quite a bit. That's a lot of plans, but apparently someone needed that information. Runtime stats. This middle section you cannot do prior to Query Store. Well, let me rephrase that. Not easily. Not without a bunch of DMs, a bunch of scripts, download like third-party tools to capture compiling time, duration, CPU usage, and have that aggravated, sum, average, min, max. Yeah, they could be other can be more difficult to trace. Absolutely. So as they loaded a bunch of data, absolutely. Update stats. Yeah. All right, so those are the stores. So now we're going to look at the settings, the different settings, because I promised you I would. So again, I am going to show you graphically and the SQL text. So again, you can download these slides off my GitHub, good documentation, maybe. And then I like big slides so I can actually read, because one of us is going blind. If you've seen my glasses there, yeah. So operation modes can be set under database properties or those two statements down below. Both of those statements do the exact same thing. If you set Query Store on or set Query Store operation mode equal read write, both of those will enable the option. I think that's the one we actually talked about. In the gray area, it shows you what your current setting is and what you want your setting to be. Next up, in our monitoring section, actually, I need to jump back. I just remembered I forgot to say something. If we go back here, there you go. If we go back to the beginning, we have pointer options. There are actually 4 sections as we go through. There's a general section, monitoring, Query Store retention. So what settings do, the retention settings, and then the Query Store capture policy. This is in 19. This area right here is new in 2019. And I'll actually explain, it's actually the best thing to happen to Query Store since Query Store. It actually allows you to, based off of this setting, depend on, tell you what queries do you want to capture. Prior to 2019, it was kind of up to SQL Server, determine which captures that were being captured, which queries were being captured. it was not, you really didn't have any control. And that was kind of a problem because you might start capturing a bunch of ad hoc queries that is like, I don't really care about those queries. I want to troubleshoot this specific one. So you can actually set that up. And this one, weight stacks capture mode, that was introduced in 17, and max plans per query was introduced in 17. All the rest were introduced back in 2016. So we'll walk through all these. But I just want to kind of point out that there's 4 main sections, 3 prior to 2019, but 4 main sections. So let me go back. Let me erase my slide. Nobody gonna erase my slide. Nobody gonna slow me down. Oh, was I singing again? Man, keep doing that. Okay, no, that's not the one. Here's the one. Okay. So for our monitoring section, I was checking my questions real quick. Okay. I think Jason got that. Thank you, Jason. So our query store monitoring settings, we have 2. And these are probably the 2 that affects your server performance or your database performance. So when people are saying we don't want to use query store because there's a lot of CPU overhead, it's probably one of these settings that you would configure to try to alleviate that. Again, it's always a balance between performance and monitoring. One part of your trade-off triangle, performance, security, and monitoring. So, if you want one of those, or if you want better monitoring, it's going to affect your performance and possibly cost. Here, maybe not, or security. In this case, it's not affecting security at all, but it's affecting your, might affect CPU usage. And again, you're kind of trading that off. But if you need to balance that, these are the 2 settings you might want to look at. So the first one, data flush intervals, or in T-SQL, data flush interval in seconds. In the graphical, you do it in minutes. In the T-SQL code, it's in seconds. So the default's 15 minutes. And what this is determining is the frequency at which data is written. So you have your procedure cache. Every 15 minutes, by default, that's when it flushes to disk. So there's that. That's where you have that I/O that you might run into, or some I/O CPU performance, where every 15 minutes we're taking this hit. A lot of the customers I've worked with, or when I've seen these, normally they move this to about 60 minutes, because that's more, you don't have that constant flushing. But then again, you can only see what was in the plan. If someone reboots the server, then you can't see anything from the last hour possibly, or you could lose an hour. But again, if I'm troubleshooting, is that hour really that, unless that query, the best plan that we had was in that last hour. I've got the history. I don't have to worry about just looking at the last plan anymore. So 60 minutes is good for that. Smaller databases, or if you have a lot of CPU and memory and things like that, then 15 minutes is good. But that's one of those that you adjust. You might want to adjust. Like I said, in most cases, I've seen it 60 minutes or an hour. The next one for monitoring is how often, I couldn't say that word, what's your interval length? Or how often do I aggregate my data? This is if you want to see your CPU usage, the memory, the sum, average, minimum value, maximum value. What time period do you want to see that? This one, I would set it to 60 as well. I would not set it to 1, because now you're getting the average of the execution plans for every minute. 1, 5, 10, 50, you're just churning now a lot of aggregating your data. So 60 minutes is typically the good setting there, or the next value, 1440, I believe that's 1 day. Now, this is one I've actually mentioned to the product group, or suggested user voice put in, that there should be a value between 1 hour and 1 day. So, 1 hour is a good increment to get a baseline, or what's the average CPU for a query, or CPU usage, or average duration. But I know a lot, 60 minutes might be too often. So maybe a 4-hour or 8-hour option would be nice. But currently it's not there. That's one of my own personal issues. One of the things I have, a lot of my customers have run into this where they'd like to have something in between. I was like, well, 60 is probably the best if you want to go back and evaluate that information. Right, so those are the two monitoring. I gotta take a drink. I can't speak. Query store retention settings. Again, the left-hand side, Object Explorer. Right-hand side is NT SQL code. Max plans per query set to 200. That's way too much. Probably a good setting 20, maybe. I think 20 is quite a bit as well, but I'd adjust that to just save space. Max size, the default setting for this is 100 meg. What's a good setting? I don't know. It depends on your database. Whatever, if you have a 15 terabyte database, this is 100 megs not going to be enough. So as a percentage, again, I don't know. That's something you want to monitor. You'd want to monitor what's right for you. Will your storage area network admin give you 100 gig? Yay! So that's something you would like to discuss with your SAN administrator. Query store capture mode. Prior to 2019, set this to auto. The default is all. None means you're pretty much just turned off query store because you just told it not to capture any queries. Well, that's the whole point. Why do you even have that setting? So prior to 2019, all or auto. Now all is going to capture everything. All would actually capture everything. All your ad hoc queries. Bob in accounting ran a select star from table, and now that I got that plan. But prior to 2019, set that to auto, and SQL will capture relevant queries based off execution count and resource consumption. What is a relevant query? Nobody knows. What do they consider relevant? No, what do they care? Save space. Will the same query plans be individually stored? Yes. So if you have that query plan, I'm not going to store the same query plan. Like the example I showed, that query had 4 plans, but it ran 12,000 times. Or that query ran 12,000 times, but it was just saving the 4 plans for that query. Just add, Bob's select statement is the most relevant query. You're absolutely right, because Bob is the most important. He's also the guy that hogs the printer all the time to print like a great big book that he could read on a website. Oh, Bob. All right, so for this one, this is probably the greatest improvement in Query Store in 2019, is that you now have a custom setting. Can you join the yeah, absolutely. Change it or custom. And this is that whole new section down the bottom where you can specify what you consider relevant, because it depends. Maybe we just want to capture Bob's queries so we can show him. It's like, Bob, see, here's your plans. You're doing it wrong. Quit using no lock. All right, so we'll come back to that one with their individual settings on how to configure the settings. Cleanup mode, how often to clean up. Set this one to auto so it goes through and cleans up the older or stale queries or stale plans that have been used recently. How often to clean up old plans. Default's 30 days. You can keep them for 367. So just in case it's a leap year, 1 day more. A leap year and 1 day more. So, 1 day more. And then lots of 30 days is good unless you want to clean it up. If I clean it up every 30 days, then I can't see the plan that Sally used back in July or August, because I'm cleaning up those stale plans. because I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, why do I care about a plan from 2 months ago? Too many clients think, I know, man. The no lock drives me crazy. I actually had I don't know if I should say this. I will. 3 weeks ago, I had a question from a client who asked how to set no lock as the default on all stored procedures. I was like, click. Oh, we lost the connection. I was like, oh no. I just told you not to use no lock. Anyway, fire them. Yeah. I couldn't believe that. I was like, I just told you everything bad about no lock. All right. That's a true story. I almost put it on Twitter, but then I didn't want to start a whole Twitter war. Like everybody. All right, so we did that one. And then weight stats capture mode. If you want to capture weight stats, this one's basically on or off. Are you going to use it? Turn it on. If you're not going to use it, turn it off. That was simple. If you actually want to capture it, this one still needs. I think it was introduced in 2017. I think it needs to mature just a little bit. It's useful, but I think in the future it will be more useful in the future. All right. So, I forgot. There's more settings. This is the new area that we're just talking about. Those, if we go back, get back. The query store capture mode. So we changed query store capture mode to custom. Then we can specify what queries we want to capture. So again, 2019, this is awesome because now I could say I don't want to capture every single query Bob's writing. I just want to capture. Well, look at the T-SQL code here. I really need to go back and make these match on both sides. But in the T-SQL code, we set the policy so the query has to run at least 100 times over the last 24 hours. But I only want queries that had a compile time of more than 2,000 milliseconds and an execution count of greater than 1,000. I'd probably would, the more I think about this, I'd probably bump those up a little bit as well, because do I need to optimize a query that ran in 2 seconds? That's pretty good, unless my boss comes in and is like, 2 seconds, that's too slow. I'm like, that's the best you're going to get. So I might bump those up a little bit more. I might not want to troubleshoot those. But again, so I could say, what's the execution count? So they had to have run a certain number of times over the last certain number of hours and add a compile and execute time. So that gives you more control of what's actually being captured, the queries. And I should say space, and because you really don't want to. So if the query ran 10,000 times an hour, 2-second queries need to be optimized. You're correct, Jason. You are correct. If it is one of those types of queries that's happening, yeah, you're absolutely correct. That's when I call Jason to optimize that for me, because I don't know. It's probably because someone's using no lock. All right, so so those are all the settings. Oh, I always do this every single time. And they nested, yeah, cursors. How to purge the data. I always forget I have this slide. Purge the data or alter database, set query store clear. So don't tell Bob about that setting with the UDF, absolutely. Yeah. You tell Bob about that setting, he's going to clear the query store every hour. Just, well, we need to clear up some space. Let's clear that out. That's how Bob sounds. All right, so here's our demonstration. I actually kind of walked through the demonstration already, but I'm going to come back to that in a second because I want to see the reports. Where are we at on time? Ooh, yeah. So the reports. So we have a report on regressed queries. This is going to show you queries that have regressed. So I can be proactive, look at this on a daily basis. First thing I do in the morning when I'm drinking my coffee, oh, I should call Sally. Her query is running slower now. Overall resource consumption. This one's actually excellent. This is a dashboard for your overall resource consumption during the last month in 4 charts. I actually have the picture here because I keep clearing out my cache or clearing out my query store. So this one isn't really for queries. This one is really establishing a baseline for your database. So the overall resource consuming queries. It probably has changed a little bit since I took this picture back in 2018. Probably should update this slide. But then that means I'd have to keep my computer on for an entire month. But you can see the activity, query duration of all your queries over the last month. So it gives you, establishes a good baseline of your overall database usage. Excuse me. So that's really a good one. Not really for queries, but for your database. So that's nice. Here we go. Click, 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 boom. Top resource consuming queries. This is the one you're probably going to use. Thank you. Top resource consuming queries. It's the one you're probably going to use the most often. And this is the one I'm going to jump to in just a moment, because this is where all the magic happens. Queries with forced plans. So if you have forced plans on a query, and you have a lot of DBAs, you don't know that Sue came in and forced a plan on a query. You want to go check. And it's like, okay, let's look, and then double check. Do we really need that plan? Is that the plan that should be forced? Or if you're evaluating regress queries, it could be that plan is no longer good. So it might be one you want to identify. High variation. This is where you have two plans for a query, and they're so wildly, what's the technical term? Out of whack. I think that's the technical term. So wildly out of whack. This one runs in 1 second, and then this one runs in 5 minutes. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So this helps you identify those queries that, with a high variation. If you're looking at wait statistics, if you have that turned on. And then tracked queries is probably the second one you'll use more often. Yay. After you've looked at the top resource consuming queries and you see your trouble children, here's the queries that are causing me problems, then I'll take it down to tracked queries so I can take a deeper look. Or I'm just going to look at one at a time. The main difference between tracked and top resource is going to show you your top 25. I actually changed it to 5 because I can't look at 25 things at once. I was like, that's how I actually sound. So 25 things at once, but I want to look at 5. And then when I see the one I want to take a closer look at, I take it down to track queries so I can actually compare plans, take a deeper look at the two plans. Okay. And we're going to get to that demonstration right after these commercial messages. Here's how I force a plan. Like I said, prior to Query Store, there's a lot of code to do this, like a whole bunch of code. In Query Store, I click the bubble, shake it up, break the bubble, and force the plan. Break it up. I can compare plans. This is in track queries. I'm going to show this in just a moment. Where if I do have two queries and I can't tell which one's better, I mean, they look the same or their bubbles are right on top of each other. I can't really tell. Well, I can take it to compare plan and match up. You can actually see where all of them, these are not equal. One of these things don't belong here. One of these things aren't the same. So you can actually, this is amazing. I love this part, which we'll demonstrate in just a moment. We'll come back to questions in just a moment. That should have been demo. All right. The last lesson here, before I'm going to do a demonstration for the last 10 minutes. This one, the lesson 4, more for documentation. If you want to download, there's our 3 stores again. I do want to rebuild this slide. I stole this picture off the docs, and it's hard to see. These are the 7 views, the 7 deadly views. The top 4 in blue, these are the views that's going to capture information for your queries, your query plans, query text. And then the ones in yellow is the compile time, the aggregated data, your runtime stats, wait stats, and then you have one table that just your start and end time period. So I do want to rebuild that slide, but you can see how they're kind of connected, the 7 views. And then the rest of the slides go through and explain what each one is. So there's one for query text, so you can use that view. Has anyone ever used a view before? No one? All right. So you can actually use these views. So there's one for the query text to actually get the text of the queries. There's one for the query store, the query plans that captures the, is this one the plans? Sorry, that one's the one that says plan. Actually has the actual plans. And then context settings. So what context do they run? So we have the reports, but you can still use these built-in views. So these first four was to get the information from the actual query plans, execution context. And then the last three is to get the runtime stat intervals. If you want to get what's the standard deviation for the duration or average CPU time, you can use for runtime stats. Stats interval is just the start and end time between how often. So if I set to aggregate every 15 minutes, this will have the start and end time every 15 minutes for the data that was captured. And then the final one is for weight stats. So I have those on the slides. We can't get into them now because that would be another half hour, 45 minutes to go through each one of those. So you can, save those documentation, put them on your office cubicle. Here's kind of an example of using them together to get the top 10 most frequent queries. So that's the slide deck. Now I'm going to go back, get back to where I once belonged. Get back, JoJo. JoJo was a man. I already sang that one, didn't I? Or was that in an earlier meeting? Sorry, I just had a flashback. All right. So we're going to come back to now let's look at our reports. Again, the overall resource doesn't really help us because I haven't captured anything over the last month. I accidentally cleared it out. Let me see, query store. Oh, here's our report. So if we walk through regressed queries, these are the queries that have slowed down over a period of time. Again, I cleared out so this one's actually when I create one of those non-clustered indexes. This one is the other non-clustered index I created that includes both unit price and order quantity. And then there's this one's the query that store procedure that's running in the background. So it is showing my top 25, but I've only been running query store for about 2 hours. But this will show me the queries that it ran faster a week ago, but now it's running slower. So that is actually a good one. I should have captured more data over the last week, but I cleared out my mistake. Overall resource, we kind of talked about that one. Let's get to the top resource consuming. Most of the other one, these are kind of straightforward. So top resource consuming queries. So I selected it, and now I'm going to hit my push pin. I'm going to push it real good. And we're going to walk through looking at our, what are we looking at? Top resource consuming queries. So here, this is query ID 1. So that's the get product info store procedure. We saw that earlier. So I click on that. My other one, this is actually showing me the top 25 based off of the queries I've run. And these are the only queries I've really been running over the last 2 hours, creating the 2 non-clustered indexes. And is that one creating the non-clustered index? And then whatever 47 is, I can't really grab that one. I read from the sys database query store options. So I was looking, I don't remember doing that. Probably ran in the one in the background. So I've only been running, this is the only data I've been running since 3 o'clock. Now, as I mentioned, I have a hard time looking at top 25, even though there's not 25 things here. So I come up here to configure. And if I just say I want to see I can see all, or I normally I put this down to 5 because that's all I can focus on at any given time. And then what do I want to have this report view? What resource? Could be duration, that's the default. Duration in milliseconds, so I want to see how long they've been running. Execution count, maybe. But I mean, I don't know if that's more troubleshooting because the query has to run when it runs. If it has to run 10,000 times, it runs 10,000 times. But that might be a way I want to see my most active queries. So if I want to troubleshoot and say, I just want to look at my most active queries, I can look for execution count. Or if I'm monitoring CPU time or logical reads, logical writes, you can kind of walk through the rest of these. CPU time is typically one I like to look at. either average, what's the average CPU time, total. So over the last hour, so you can also set the time interval. So you can focus, if I just want to see the last hour, or if Sally says, hey, last Friday, I was having this issue between noon and 2. So I can just focus custom and then find exactly, focus in on that time period. All right, I'm going to say we'll say last 12 hours should be good. Could have just been last 3 hours. So we actually got a couple more. So apparently I did, well, this is something with database files, allocation, partition. I'm not sure what that one was. So here's the main 3. This one, CPU time, creating the non-clustered index actually has an average CPU time, took more than the store procedure I was running. And again, with the other non-clustered index, that just including unit price. But this is the query. That's not the query. Is this one? Where'd it go? Apparently my query, apparently it didn't, I'm just looking at the top 5. So the query I'm running in the background doesn't even register as in my top 5. So let's go back to duration. Let's see if this was, is that it? Non-clustered index. It's all the background system stuff.
Yeah, I think
All
you want
right.
to go back to total for the statistic or do
Oh,
duration.
because I'm doing, yeah, I'm
Yep.
doing it. Thank you.
Mhm.
That's probably, yay, thank you. I was like, see, that's why when you customize the demo, bad things happen. I was doing average, so so the average duration was less than stuff in the background. Just eat resources? Yes. How would I find a query that's hogging my slow, not dead, like just eat resources? Well, it's kind of here where I'm, what's eating my resources. So CPU or logical reads or physical reads, memory consumption. So if I wanted to like capture, okay, I'm looking at my top 5. So is it this query? Now these obviously these run pretty fast, but if I had slower running queries, yeah. Let me go back to duration. Okay. So this one ran the longest because I had it running for 2.5 hours. Actually ended up running 28,000. Is that right? I guess so. Ran 28,000 time. And now we can see the 4 plans. So 1, 2, 53. I have no idea where they came up with the numbers for plan IDs. Like, hey, 39. But we can see for this query, I clicked on it, query ID 1. Get product info is the store procedure that I ran a lot in the background. And we have 4 plans. So this plan, actually, let's look at plan 1 first. So plan 1 is the clustered index scan. So this happened when I first started running the store procedure, and I was just using the default indexes. I didn't create any of the demo indexes that included that included those other 2 fields, order quantity and unit price. But there is an index on product ID. There's a non-clustered index on, is it product ID? Well, we'll see in a second. There is one, but this one, the clustered index scan was used for when I specified product ID 870 because it had 4,688 rows. So the plan decided we're not going to use a non-clustered index. We're just going to scan the entire clustered index. Did I say that right? Yeah, scan the, yeah. So that's obviously going to be the slower one. 39, it's kind of hidden behind the blue, so it's kind of hard to see. This one did actually, I don't want to do this one yet. 53, I want to use 2. All right, number 2, for that same query, is the same query we're looking at. You can see query 1, plan 2, select product ID, order quantity, unit price. It's the same query, same store procedure. But this time it's doing a key lookup where it's able to retrieve, this is the index that's built in. I can tell that because the object name says IX and doesn't say demo. My indexes start with demo, so I can identify that those are the ones I created for the demo. I'm smart like that. So in this case, it was able to get product ID, and this is for those smaller when I think for product ID 897 only returned a few rows. Or in this one, it estimated 75.6667. So one of those where it just returned 2 or 200 rows. So it's able to, is faster to get the, do an index seek for the product ID and then loop down to get unit price and order quantity on the output list. So key lookup, so that's faster than the clustered index. But to compare it to 39, where's gray, this is also doing a key lookup. But the difference here is that this is one of the indexes I built that includes unit product ID and unit price. So it said this one's actually faster than the other index, or the index that came with the VentureWorks. This is actually going to run faster because I can return more information from, actually, is this the, yes. I was trying to remember. And I still had to go down and do a key lookup to get order quantity. I was trying to remember. And then the final one, 53, you would think it's the fastest, but according to duration in milliseconds, looks like it's slower. We'll come back to that. But this is an example of an index that covers a query, because so that's the plan that's using the index seek and is getting all 3 columns from the non-clustered index. Now, if I wanted to see, I can't really, I mean, I got poor eyesight, so like looking at, I kind of think 53 should be the best, but there's 2, as far as duration milliseconds is concerned, they kind of look. So what I want to do, I want to take this query over to tracked query so I could take a closer look at it. So to do that, I find out what is my query ID. It's query 1. And I can go to the tracked queries.
You can actually use the little track guy at the top to go into it.
I was going to get to that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry.
No, you're right. So you put in tracking queries and say, I want to look at that query so I can take a closer look. What Andrea was, this is actually a newer button, but I could also come back here to top resource, click on it next to refresh. This button right here automatically does it for you. So it takes you to and automatically puts in the 1. Thank you, Andrea. Yay, jazz hands. You could do it both ways, but I wanted to show you how to do it the manual way. But I think they added that in 2017. They just snuck up on me one day, like, hey, what's this do? Oh, I didn't really get into the, but we'll come back here to track query. So, oh, they changed the colors on me again. So if I'm looking at these, I really can't tell the difference between, okay, is 2 and 53, which one would be better? So if I hold down my shift key and select both of them, I can click compare plans, boop, and now I can actually compare the 2 to see which one would be the better plan. So I can see the top and bottom. And now the next question, what if I want to see more than 2? Can I compare more than 2? I don't know. Let's find out. Hold down the shift key. Oh no, only lets me do 2. And that's one of the other things that, like, man, I wish, but I can only do 2 at a time. I can only compare 2 at a time. So I had to compare plans. And now I can see, here's the 2 bookmark lookups or key lookups. I keep calling them bookmark lookups. Which one was faster? So I can really look at individual settings. So this was compile memory. It looks like this one's compile CPU. It looks like this one's better. So the top plan, that one looks like it's the better plan. What about, I can't remember, was that 39? Okay. I think 53 was actually the better plan. It was, yeah. But looking at the bubbles, it's hard to tell. So if I compare the plans, then I can see, well, this one's smaller, this one's faster. So the top plan is plan 53, index seek. So we can actually see, compare and contrast. And then I can print this out, take it to Bob and say, Bob, see, your query's wrong, Bob. All right. And then one last thing, I know I'm running, I kind of ran up against the wall there. One last thing, sir. Once I realized 53 is the one I want, you are the one I want. Ooh, 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 honey. I got 53 and I force plan. Force plan 53, I get the check mark. That's worth query store just to be able to do that. Because that would have taken about 45 minutes to an hour to actually force a plan if I actually knew what I was doing and had the code. I have another half hour. Here it took 2 seconds, and because I was singing when I was doing it. So that's amazing. And if I go to queries with forced plans, now I can see that that's the plan that was forced. So it might be something I want to go back and review. Didn't know you could compare plans. Oh, it's that's almost, I don't know which is better, forced plans or compare plans. Might be compare plans might be better than forced plans. I'm not sure. All right. So that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I try to get like all the settings, see the reports, to kind of get you excited about Query Store. I keep saying this is my favorite thing in SQL tool. Yeah, comparing. Yeah, but that's it. That's all I got. Unless there's other questions. Thanks for coming. Drive safely. Tip your waitress.